Hello everyone. So we're going to be starting out with chapter number 8 today, that is your law relating to evidence. So starting out with our evidence law, please note that the erstwhile law was known as the Indian Evidence Act, but from 2023 it is to be known as the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam 2023. For all intents and purposes, I'm going to be calling it as the BSA 2023, or if for an even shorter form, I'm going to be referring to our evidence law as the BSA. So the BSA applies to all judicial proceedings in a court of law as well as court martials, but it doesn't apply to court martials that were convened under the Army Act, the Navy Act, the Naval Discipline Act, or the Air Force Act. Generally, the BSA will not apply to any affidavits presented to any court or officer, or before any proceedings before an arbitrator. What exactly are judicial proceedings? The BSA states that judicial proceedings are those proceedings in which evidence may be legally taken on oath. So there are only a few authorities that are allowed to take evidence on oath, and that is all of your judges, whether civil or criminal, and certain other authorities who have been granted this power under their respective laws. The word signifies that only instruments by which relevant facts are brought before the court, that is, either through witnesses, documents, etc., are considered to be evidence. So, what is evidence? Evidence means and includes oral evidence as well as documentary evidence. Oral evidence are all of the statements made before the court of law, or those statements that the court requires to be made before it. Statements which are made by witnesses, or any statements made by people when they are under inquiry. And documentary evidence includes all documents, including electronic records. So the word evidence refers generally to oral and documentary evidence. Generally, under Indian Evidence Act, we talk about the burden of proof, in the sense that the person that is making the allegation is the one that has to prove it. So in a civil suit, we will say that the plaintiffs are the ones that are making the allegations, and hence the plaintiff will have to prove his allegations. This is what we call as the burden of proof. The burden of proof always rests on the person who is making the allegation. Now in civil suits, before we go into civil suits, the question is how much of proof is required. Is minimum proof required or is maximum proof required? For that, we have to distinguish between civil suits and criminal cases. In civil suits, they are saying that mere preponderance of probability is enough. That means even if there is a probability that this person has committed a tort or a civil wrong, then punishment can be given. Whereas in criminal cases, the proof must be beyond a reasonable doubt. That means the court must be convinced that only the accused person could have committed that crime. So the level of proof to be given in criminal cases is much, much higher. Now, when we come to the different types of evidence, not only do we have oral evidence and documentary evidence, but rather we can have proof of facts by oral evidence or proof of contents of documents. For example, if we have oral evidence or if we have facts, then we can have a witness come and identify those facts. Or if we have a document, then we can have a secondary document that helps to prove the original document. So section number 59 states that all facts except documents and electronic records may be proved by oral evidence. So for example, if there is a letter that is presented as evidence before a court of law, and this letter needs to be proved, the letter needs to be proved in the sense that if we can bring a witness to come and say that yes, this letter was written by this person, then that is what we call as proof of facts by oral evidence. But please understand that point number 1, they are saying that all facts except documents and electronic records. So any statements can be corroborated by a second witness, or all oral evidence must be direct evidence only. We will talk about direct evidence shortly, but every oral evidence has to be given by the witness himself. It cannot be a recording of a witness, it cannot be heard by a third person and then the third person is coming to the court of law. It doesn't work that way. Second one is proof of content of documents. Content of documents can be either primary or by secondary evidence. Primary evidence is the document by itself, the original copy of the evidence, whereas your secondary evidence are your certified copies, Xerox copies, counterparts of documents, oral accounts of contents of a document, etc. become secondary evidence. And then documents relating to electronic records. Whenever electronic records are presented before a court of law, it must be proved in accordance with section 65B with regards to admissibility of electronic records. We will be seeing that shortly. First is, what is a fact? A fact is anything, any state of things, relation of things capable of being perceived by the senses, and that is why they are known as physical facts. Or any mental condition of which a person is conscious, it is also known as psychological facts. So a fact can include both physical and psychological facts. Evidence can be given in relation to a fact in issue as well as relevant facts. What is fact in issue? A fact in issue are all those facts relating to the issues framed by the judge when we had referred to it under the CPC. When the judge frames issues in a court of law, then he is streamlining the requirement of arguments in the proceedings of court. Also, issues refer to those allegations made by the plaintiff and that which was denied by the defendant. So, all facts which relate to the issues are known as fact in issues, and all other facts necessary to prove the fact in issue is known as relevant facts. But according to section, this is given as per section 3. So now we have to try and understand what exactly is relevant facts. One fact is said to be relevant to another when it is connected to the other in any of the ways referred to in the provisions of relevancy of facts. That means, in short, we need to refer to our laws itself, and if the law says yes, this is a relevant fact, then it is a relevant fact. So again, we'll come back to it. As per section 3, every evidence can be given in a suit or proceeding in relation to every fact in issue or relevant facts and no others. How do we know if a fact is relevant? We have to check the provisions of the law regarding relevancy of facts. Now, when we come to the concept of relevancy, we have to see the concept of first logical relevancy, legal relevancy, and admissibility. A fact may be logical, but it may not be legal, in the sense that if a fact is logically relevant, it still has to pass the test of the BSA. That is, if the provisions of the BSA if the provisions of the BSA say that this fact is a relevant fact, then it becomes legally relevant. And a legally relevant fact can still be disregarded because it may not be admissible. Let's look at an example for this. A logically relevant fact may be, we may refer to a person being say for example, Arjun is a surgeon. Now this fact by itself has no connection to the matter at hand. But then if the disputed matter is the case of medical negligency, then Arjun being a surgeon becomes a relevant fact. So while the fact was merely logically relevant earlier, because it is given in relation to the proceedings of the suit, it becomes legally relevant. But a legally relevant fact need not be admissible. There are many reasons why a legally relevant fact may not be admissible, in the sense that if it was communicated between a husband and wife, the client and his advocate, these are what we call as professional or privileged communications. Then if the document is unstamped, or if the document is unregistered, then this document may not be admissible. So for every fact to be admissible, it must be legally relevant, and every legally relevant fact must be logically relevant. What is a fact in issue? A fact in issue is either by itself or in connection with any other fact, the existence, non-existence, nature or extent of any right, liability or disability is asserted or denied in any suit or proceedings. So in short, it means any fact which by itself or in connection with the other facts which may be asserted or denied in any suit or proceedings in relation to any right, liability or disability. These are your main facts and issues, and these are what will be considered by the court of law. Under the provisions of law for the time being in force, where any court records an issue of fact, the fact to be asserted or denied in the answer to such issue is a fact in issue. So it's like we said, when the judge frames issues in a court of law, that becomes a fact in issue. The next is presumptions. With regards to presumptions, we have already seen this with respect to our interpretation of statutes chapter, where we've seen words like the court may presume or shall presume. That is, the court will have to assume that something is correct. Whether it is compulsory, may presume, or if it's compulsory, shall presume, or whether it is temporary, may presume, is dependent on how it is worded. So what the BSA is saying is that wherever it is provided in this adhiniyam, the court may presume a fact until it is disproved or proved, or the court may call proof of it. So say for example that we have a document which bears the seal and stamp of the register of the collector of stamps. Now if we look at the provisions of the Indian Stamp Act, it clearly says that the collector of the stamp may be deemed to be final evidence or final proof that all the provisions of this act have been correctly followed. So the court will always presume that a document which has the seal of the collector was stamped or registered in accordance with the laws if the seal is present. But the opposite party can still come and challenge that evidence as being improperly stamped or not properly stamped. But then in this case, they will have to prove that the document is not properly stamped. So the word may presume and shall presume is merely a shifting of burden of proof. The court will always presume that it is correct, but then the other party can always disprove it or challenge the correctness of it. Presumptions can either be in law or in fact, and any presumptions which are inference are always rebuttable. Presumption of law is either conclusive or rebuttable. We now come to section number 4, that is not only section 4, we will be looking at section number 4 to 14 with respect to closely connected facts. Section number 4 to 14. Okay, so let's start with section number 4, that is relevancy of facts forming part of the same transactions. For this we refer to our first concept known as res gestae. Res gestae is actually the first rule against the hearsay rule. The hearsay rule states that any evidence which is heard from a third party will not become relevant, because the definition of fact says that anything which is perceived by the physical senses becomes a fact. So if a person is coming to give witness before the court of law, they must have witnessed it, they must have touched it, tasted it, smelt it, heard it, or seen it with their own eyes, or they must have some psychological belief. But they cannot hear it from someone else and then come and give the evidence. This is like a case of Japanese whisper or Chinese whisper, wherein generally the first person who hears the sentence will hear one sentence and the last person will hear something entirely different. Because this is the case, what the court says is that unless you have physically experienced or seen that activity, we will not accept your word as evidence. and that is what we call as the hearsay rule or the heresy rule. You hear and then you say. Now in that process, words can get twisted. However, res gestae is an exception to your hearsay rule. Exception is res gestae. What is res gestae? Res gestae are all those facts though which are not an issue. That means, please remember, as per section 3A of the BSA, you can only submit or admit facts which are an issue or relevant facts. Here, res gestae is a set of facts which are not an issue, but they are so connected to the fact and issue so as to form part of the same transaction. Then in such a case, they become relevant because they occurred at the same time, same place, or whether they occurred at different times and different places. For example, let's assume that we are sitting in this classroom and right outside this classroom we hear a loud bang. Now the students sitting in this classroom merely hear the bang, but we don't actually see anything happening. Now in less than a second, we hear a person running across the corridor screaming, the battery burst, the battery is on fire. Now please tell me, as students in this classroom, have you all actually witnessed the battery bursting? The answer is no. But rather, we know that the battery burst only because someone outside of the class was running at full speed screaming the battery burst. Now, we are witnesses who have only heard the bang, but we have not actually seen the battery bursting. And therefore, any statement by us stating that the battery burst actually amounts to the hearsay evidence. But because it happened so fast, to form part of the same transaction, it was impossible for that person to lie, and it was impossible for us to presume something else because it happened so fast. And that is why, even though we did not physically see the battery bursting, even if we give evidence to the court of law saying the battery burst, there was a fire, and as a result, etc., the court will take it into consideration because they are facts which are happening so fast and so in connection with each other that they become relevant simply because they are closely related. And this is your section number 4, that is relevancy of facts which were not an issue but forming part of the same transaction become relevant. Our next is section number 5, facts constituting the occasion, the effect, the opportunity or state of things for the occurrence of a fact to be proved, whether it's a fact or a relevant fact. Let's look at the example here. The fact is shortly before the robbery, the question is whether A robbed B. The fact is that before the robbery, B went to a fair with money in his possession, and that he was waving it around saying, "See, I earned so much money." This becomes relevant because we are trying to say that B went to the fair, showed people that he had money, and as a result, A found out that B had money and eventually stole the money from him. So the fact that B went to the fair with money in his possession becomes a relevant fact. Additionally, things like the robbers had escaped in a vehicle bearing tire marks of a certain consistency or a particular pattern. So this helps the police to identify that this pattern could belong to these wheels and hence this car, and therefore the robbers have escaped in this car. That also becomes a fact, and that is what section 5 is saying. Section number 6 refers to motive, preparation, previous or subsequent conduct. While motive and preparation are not punishable under law, they do become relevant facts in case of understanding why a person committed a crime. Previous conduct and subsequent conduct. How did a person behave before he committed the activity? How did he behave after he committed the activity? Say for example that a person who has stolen gold from a jewelry shop. Now subsequent to the robbery, subsequent to that act, this said person has not come to the office, has not attended any functions, and nobody who is his nearby relatives and friends have seen him. That becomes subsequent conduct. That means he's gone missing. Or previous conduct. Right before the robbery, this person was behaving very rudely, he was constantly tensed, he was shouting at everybody, and he was behaving in a very odd manner. This can be previous conduct. All of this helps us to understand the motive and preparation in committing a particular activity. Section number 7. Facts which are necessary to explain or introduce relevant facts. Again, let me tell you, the only facts that are allowed to be presented before court of law are facts in issue and relevant facts. But sometimes to explain a relevant fact, we have to introduce another fact. Let's say, for example, that the fact in issue is whether Arjun murdered Preeta. Okay, this is the question. This is the all facts relating to this question whether Arjun murdered Preeta is a fact in issue. Now, Arjun is a surgeon. Now, why is Arjun being a surgeon have anything to do with Arjun murdering Preeta? It may not be connected whatsoever. But then the relevant fact may be that Arjun used a surgical knife to murder Preeta. So, how did he get a surgical knife? Suddenly, the fact that Arjun is a surgeon becomes relevant. So, to introduce it to the court, to introduce the fact that the murder weapon was a surgical knife. So, who has access to surgical knives? Not every person. But Arjun, being a surgeon, would have access to a surgical knife, and using a surgical knife, he has murdered Preeta. So, can I say that the fact that Arjun is a surgeon is necessary to explain a fact and issue or a relevant fact? Hence, this sentence will also become relevant. Subsequently, they are saying that any facts which help to support an inference or rebut an inference suggested by the fact and issue or relevant fact. Now, say for example that we will continue with the same this thing, that Arjun is a surgeon. Okay, this is presented by the prosecution, saying that because he is a surgeon, he had access to the murder weapon and he was hence able to kill Preeta. But the defense may come out and say, while Arjun is a surgeon, he has not practiced in the last 5 years, and that he has not been practicing in a hospital where he has easy access to a surgical knife. And this is a fact which helps to rebut this relevant fact. Any fact which helps to identify a person or fix the time or place where the fact and issue or the relevant fact happened. So, to establish that Arjun is a surgeon, he was working in said hospital 5 years ago becomes a relevant fact, because it helps to fix the time, that either Arjun is a surgeon and was not practicing for 5 full years, and he last entered that hospital only 5 years ago. And then they're saying any facts which show the relation of parties by which that fact was transacted. All of these become relevant under section number 7. Section number 8. Things said or done by a conspirator in reference to a common design. Generally when two people have conspired to commit an activity or wrong, anything said or done by one person in reference to the common intention is a relevant fact against each one of them. So, if there are conspirators to a certain crime or activity, then anything said by one person is relevant as against evidence against others. Section number 9. When facts not otherwise relevant become relevant. Generally, with facts are irrelevant, but then they become relevant if they are inconsistent with any fact and issue or relevant fact, or if by themselves or in connection with the other facts, make the existence of any fact or relevant fact highly improbable or probable. So, let's look at the question. Question is whether A committed a crime at Chennai on a certain day. The fact that A was at Ladakh is relevant because at the time that the crime was committed, A was a distance from a place where it was committed. It would render it highly improbable, though not impossible, that he committed it. So, the fact that he was at Ladakh that day becomes a relevant fact. Any facts which help to determine the amount of damages in a court of law will also become relevant, and any facts which help to understand a custom in question, a right or custom in question, will also become relevant. Because please remember, customs are followed by many people over a period of time, and when it is followed by many people over a period of time, we will have to ask the people in question itself whether this right or custom exists or where this right or custom has no longer been practiced by people. So, any transactions where right or custom was created, claimed, modified, or recognized, asserted or denied, or was inconsistent with its existence, or particular transactions where that custom was either accepted or denied. Section number 12 refers to those facts which show or talk about the state of mind or bodily feelings. That is, what a person is going through, his state of mind, his mens rea, his intention, his knowledge, his good faith, his ill will, his goodwill, everything becomes relevant, because generally we will say that without intention, any activity becomes just an activity. It cannot be a wrongful activity. So, any kind of state of, any fact relating to the state of mind becomes a relevant fact. But that state of mind exists only to the particular matter in question. We must not simply say that the defendant is always an angry person, so hence he is likely to have committed the crime. No, remember, for criminal cases, the proof must be beyond a reasonable doubt. And to say that he is an angry person and that he could have committed the crime is not proper proof. So, we must show his state of mind in respect to that question. Because let's assume that a man finds out that his wife is cheating on him, and as soon as he hears that statement, he immediately takes the thing nearest to him and then he hits a person who happens to be his wife's relationship, and that said person collapses on the floor. Now at this point, his state of mind does come up, because he was not acting as a rational person, and that as soon as he heard that statement, his emotions got in the way and he behaved differently. But let's change up the example over here. If he hears that his wife has been cheating on him but does nothing at that time, but quietly goes, buys a gun, goes to the other person's house after his shift is over. When he knocks on the door and that person opens the door, he shoots that person 3 times. Now here it is a clear case of intention, because he did not hear the news and immediately react, but rather he planned the whole thing and then he committed the murder. So in both these scenarios, the state of mind was necessary to prove a particular point. Explanation 2 says that where one person is being tried for an offense, any previous commission of the offense becomes relevant. Section 13, checking whether an act was accidental or intentional. Because where something is intentional, we can say that there is a high level of mens rea, but if it was done by accident, then it lowers the amount of mens rea. Let's look at the illustration here. A is accused of delivering to B a counterfeit currency. The question is whether the delivery of the currency was accidental or not. The fact that soon after the delivery to B, A also delivered counterfeit currency to C, D and E. Now, these are relevant because it shows that the delivery to B was not by accident. And lastly, we have section number 14, which is talking about that course of business, when does it become relevant? When a particular act was done, we have to check whether it was done in the course of business or whether it was a one-time thing. So, for example, the question is whether a particular letter was dispatched. The fact that it was the ordinary course of business for all the letters to be put in a certain place to be carried to the post, and that particular letter was put in that place, becomes relevant. The question is whether a particular letter reached A. The fact that it was posted in due course and was not returned to the letter office through the return letter office becomes relevant.